Hello, I'm Ryan Cook, and this is Civic Tech Chat, a show that looks at the way technology, politics, and policy impacts the world around us, the tools we use, the way services are delivered, and how we talk about and set policy all shape our society. We'll gather around and have a chat about these things together and more. Before we get started, I do want to let you all know that we've started a Discord for the podcast. There will be a link with an invite down in the episode description. Do feel free to go check that out. It's a small community right now, but hoping to grow it. It's a great way to reach out to me and let me know things that you might want us to cover, or to just hang out and talk about civic tech. Anyway, let's go ahead and start the show. Mike, thank you so much for joining us here on Civic Tech Chat. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you do?
Certainly. My name is Mike Gifford. I'm a senior strategist at Civic Actions. I am the accessibility practice lead. Also active on issues of sustainability as well. Largely what I'm doing is being involved in working with our clients on trying to improve the accessibility of the work we're doing. But since since we're in a climate crisis, also looking to find ways to take that experience and that knowledge and bring it over into sustainability as well.
What would you say is your personal why? That thing that drives you to get out of bed each morning and do what you do?
I think that a huge part of it is just sort of realizing that we have so much potential right now, and this is an opportunity for us to go and to make a difference in order to make the world a better place. Although there's really serious challenges facing us at this time, we've never had more potential to go off and to improve our species and to be able to figure out how to go off and work effectively together in order to live more harmoniously on this planet. So it's that opportunity to actually make a difference and feel that there's space in order to go off and to create a real significant change using digital technology.
Are there any videos, podcasts, books, or other media that you'd recommend to folks out there listening?
Absolutely. Actually, I would say in terms of a book, there's a book I was reading recently on the solar punk genre that's a psalm for the well-built, and that's an interesting sort of new genre that's coming out. That's also on a climate tech perspective. Some people here may like looking at Neil Stephenson and his book Termination Shock. That's fairly recent. From a podcast perspective, I listen to quite a lot of podcasts, but there's an old one that I'm still quite fond of called Radio Open Source that doesn't actually touch on open source issues, and I'm also a Drupal accessibility maintainer, so very interested in open source and how that whole community grows. But this Radio Open Source has a lot of interesting interviews with both about technology and society and culture, and I'd also say I'd say the Long Now Foundation also has some great podcasts I enjoy listening to.
Actually, I have a follow-up there. You mentioned a genre called solar punk. I haven't heard of that before. Could you talk about what that is?
So there's climate fiction. That's a relatively new genre that you can read, and Kim Stanley Robinson and others have written within the climate fiction genre. But then there's climate forward fiction or solar punk. So solar punk is sort of the vision of, well, what happens when we get through the environmental catastrophes that or the challenges that we're in right now? What would our society look like? How do we envision the possibility of people living together in a way beyond advanced capitalism? So it's just sort of exploring ways of people living sustainably on the planet through fiction.
So potentially a bit related to the subject we're going to broach today then, and maybe a good segue for us to hop into it. In that, we're going to talk a bit about accessibility and sustainability today. When we're talking about that first bit, accessibility, particularly on the web, what does that mean to you?
So it's essentially making sure that we're working to see that everyone can access digital tools. Like right now, digital is how people do their work, their socializations, their engagement in politics, everything is happening on a digital sphere, and trying to make sure that we're eliminating barriers so that everyone can participate fully in society. That's really what I see as the goal of accessibility at this point. It largely rolls up from a digital perspective into the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. It's pronounced a bunch of different ways, but that's a group of standards that have been evolved through the World Wide Web consortiums, through the Web Accessibility Initiative, and so that group of standards is largely what global accessibility standards are built on. So whether that's the Section 508 in the U.S., whether it's the Accessible Canada Act in Canada, or the Web Accessibility Directive in the European Union, all of them use that as a basis for understanding the guidelines.
And the standards that you're mentioning, what do they typically seek to do? So if someone maybe is approaching this conversation a little bit unfamiliar with what the WCAG standards are meant for, could you talk a bit about that?
For sure. So it's basically broken into four broad pillars, trying to make sure that people can perceive, operate, understand the technology and the environment that they're engaging with within a robust framework. So yes, you need to be able to see, if you're a low vision person, you need to have high contrast fonts on your phone in order to be able to see the text that's on there. But even if you don't have low vision, you should be able to go outside and look at your phone on a sunny day and be able to go off and find the address you're trying to get to. We shouldn't be assuming that people are going to be using this technology in an ideal light controlled environment. Microsoft put forward a really interesting analysis, reframing of accessibility, in that there's people who have permanent disabilities, there's temporary disabilities, and there's also situational disabilities. So people often think about situations where somebody's blind and trying to accommodate the blind users, and when they're thinking about accessibility, it's an extreme use case that captures people's imagination. And there aren't that many blind people, so people don't think it's actually that important. On the other hand, if you look at people with disabilities, it's about a quarter of the population. So it's actually a significant minority of the population that has some form, identifies as having some form of disability. But when you include temporary disabilities, like say you're getting your eyes tested and you have to go off and put eye drops in your eyes and everything's blurry for a few hours afterwards, or you've got allergies like I do today, and you're trying to go off and to see through somewhat blurry eyes, that's another type of disability, but it's temporary because it goes away when the pollens disappear, and also situational disabilities, things like being outside on a sunny day and trying to go off and to enjoy one of the last beautiful days of fall before winter kicks in. These are things that we often try and do, and our technology sometimes doesn't allow us to be as productive as we could be.
In our conversation to prepare for this interview, we talked a bit about how accessibility can be one of those things that's often left off to the end of a project. Can you talk a bit about the sort of impact or cost that choice has, as opposed to being something that gets attention earlier on?
It's sort of like if you're looking to go off and build a building and then add accessibility requirements to the building, it's going to be a lot more expensive, because it'll probably be more expensive to retrofit an existing building for accessibility than it would be to simply build it from scratch. Accessibility isn't just like throwing on a coat of paint. It's like making the walls wider, and so there's different criteria that need to be thought of when you're developing it. So the earlier you can address accessibility in the design process, the more effectively it will be, the more robust it will be, and the less it will cost. So trying to shift the accessibility left, and see that not only is it being addressed early when you're thinking about the design process, but that everyone understands what their role is to try and build an accessible product. If it's really part of the process and part of the culture of the team that's building the tool, then it's something that actually will have a real high result of being accessible and reasonably affordable. If you get to the end of the project and then you're suddenly realizing that there's a whole bunch of accessibility stuff that nobody bothered to look at, well, you're going to have to retrofit and redesign and rebuild everything that you've done before. before, and it's probably going to be fragile. It's probably going to be not as secure as it was previously, and it's also something that won't necessarily look as clear and well designed as it was before, because it was an afterthought that needed to be reconsidered. So there's some reasons.
You mentioned the idea of trying to inject it as a part of team process and culture. What does that look like when a team has done that successfully?
So if it's something, if a team actually builds the process into their if they're building accessibility into their process, and they're going to be involved, they're talking about accessibility in their scrums. They're going to be doing automated testing throughout the process. They're going to actually do manual testing, because they will know that automated testing only gets you a certain portion of the way. You can't automate test for all accessibility requirements. There'll be you'll be able to have conversations about, like, what is the purpose of this? What are we trying to accomplish here? You'll see accessibility annotations in the design system, so that the designers and the developers and the content maintainers can all sort of come to an agreement about what semantically should be happening with this. And there'll also be elements where you'll be able to see more clearly if you're looking at support for things like keyboard only users, or for that matter tablet interfaces, trying to make sure that more people are able to access it, and we're not assuming that everyone is accessing the technology that we're building through the same interface. Given that the number of people who are using mobile devices, it's a bit shocking how many interfaces are still built assuming that you're using a mouse. And that's clearly not the case. Even if you don't have a disability, people are using their phones more and more in order to consume and produce content.
I hear you painting a picture of a team that has a conversation about accessibility at every layer or part of its development process. So I think I heard you mention things that would imply that you're talking about it when you're preparing the work, when you're planning the work, when you're asking questions about it as you're implementing the work. If you're the sort of shop that puts together a test plan or something, it's like part of that test plan. If you do some QA, there's like some portion of that. Am I hearing you correctly? That's kind of something that is in like all layers of your kind of iterative cycle. There's something about accessibility.
That's absolutely right, Ryan. And that every role has a responsibility. There's a value in having an accessibility lead in order to answer some of the basic questions. But whether you're a project manager, a developer, a DevOps person, there's a QA person, like there's all kinds of ways in which accessibility plays into various different roles, and trying to make sure that everyone understands what their responsibility is to implement accessibility, to make sure that that's something that's not going to be that we're not going to be overlooking things is really quite important.
If there's some folks out there that are listening to this, they're nodding along with us, maybe they're on their commute on the train or something, and they're finally like, I agree with this, and I want to try to do this at work. I want to be an accessibility champion. What advice would you give them as they're getting started with that thought?
It really does help to have support from leadership, making sure that there's some buy-in from leadership that this is a direction that the organization as a whole wants to go. If you don't have that, then simply trying to go off and build a network of people who are talking about accessibility can be quite important. There are so many good newsletters out there that are producing new material on a weekly basis, where you can simply subscribe to a newsletter and reshare content into your internal Slack channel, so that you can have that as a discussion that you can sort of take that information and read that. It's really about how do you try and get people talking and asking about that. When we're looking at the hiring process at Civic Actions, we really try and support. We look for people who have certifications. So whether that's the DHS Trusted Tester or the IAAP WAS or CPACC, we're looking for people who've actually done that, and so that's again something that you can do to try and make sure that you're bringing in people who have gone through the process of really trying to learn about accessibility and becoming sort of recognized in their knowledge.
Sustainability is the other part of the topic that we're looking to dig into today. When we talk about web sustainability, what exactly are we referring to?
We're essentially talking about the environmental impact of our digital lives, and specifically the web in this particular instance. But our but we don't think about the environmental impact of the internet. But the environmental impact of the internet is actually quite vast. It's on par with the airline industry, but unlike the airline industry, the digital world is growing at an exponential rate. So we know that when we're dealing with the growth of virtual reality, artificial intelligence, blockchain, all those things are requiring greater and greater processing power, greater data, greater bandwidth. Like just the impact of big data alone, well, it has a huge impact in terms of how is this information being stored, how is it being transferred, how is it being backed up. All that has environmental impacts because they're stored in gigantic data centers, and yes, it's more environmentally friendly to go off into to store information in the cloud in an environment that is really designed for a single purpose than it is to store it in a machine that's in your basement most of the time. If you, in terms of organizational capacities and organizational strengths, but I think that the challenge of moving these data centers is they're vast. To build and maintain these data centers, it takes a great deal of energy, and they're often not cooled or powered by renewable energy. So if most of our data centers are powered by dirty coal, then that's something that's going to have a long-term impact on whether or not we're able to go off and transition to a renewable economy. And so trying to go off into to think about what is the source of our power, how is our energy being produced, and also looking at the devices that we have, and are even trying to go off and make sure that our cell phones are designed so that they last 5 years instead of 2. That's a design decision that currently isn't well supported in the manufacturers. You can't build you can't buy a cell phone in North America that's designed to be repaired. Really, like they're all about replacing them every 2 to 3 years. So how do we extend that so that we're not having to go off and to produce and dispose of so much valuable raw material?
So I guess in a way, even this very conversation that folks are listening to has some impact, right, on the climate. So in this case,
sure,
we're starting with even our recording session we're doing right now, where we're on a platform service that has a data center somewhere.
Yeah.
And then, it's being sent off to some RSS feed once I, stop procrastinating and edit this episode to be downloaded to a device that, as you were talking about with, the right to repair topic, perhaps is one that's not so easy to replace the battery. So it's a device that's on a 3-year cycle instead of a 5. It seems like as a digital citizen, you're going to in some way kind of touch this topic as you navigate your day, is maybe what I'm hearing here.
Absolutely. If climate change is important to you and you're thinking about your impact, I mean, this is digital still isn't likely to be your biggest single source of impact. Probably still is going to be bigger if you're flying or if you're commuting into work. There's a lot of advantages. Like certainly teleworking is a lot more environmentally friendly than driving a car into your office and managing it that way. It may not be better than cycling or walking into work, but still it's telecommuting has a lot of advantages because even though there is a carbon impact, it is much smaller than other modes of transportation. And it's also interesting to be looking for those vendors that are really taking an advanced stand on climate change issues, and so Microsoft has done some wonderful things. Google has made some great announcements. I think Zoom has also tried to go off and to make commitments to reducing their CO2 emissions. Most of the big environmental players, most of the big data digital players have made some commitments on climate change at this point. At least what they're going to do between now and 2050. Now, mind you, between now and 2050, that's a lot of computers will be bought and sold, and many terawatts of electricity will have been consumed in that time frame. But there certainly is an initial commitment to realize that this is something that is important.
If there's folks out there that are maybe they're trying to build right now a thing that's going to be used by a lot of people on the web, and they're listening to this and going, "Oh, well, maybe this is something I want to think about." What are some things they could try to seek to do to make sure what they're building isn't absolutely horrible with its impact.
If you're looking at just sort of basic awareness, there's a couple of really interesting tools out there that are actually similar to the tools that are available for accessibility. So if you're looking at accessibility, the Wave toolbar is probably the most common tool that people know about to sort of look at and evaluate accessibility issues. For the web, one of the big ones is the website carbon.com website and the Green Web Foundation. Both of those are really useful resources for information about both the sourcing of the electricity for the data center that you're using, as well as essentially the page size of the site. So if you're trying to get a sort of a rough sense of how much carbon a page consumes to go off and to load a page of data, websitecarbon.com is a great sort of project for that, and the team at Whole Grain Digital is behind sort of implementing that. They've done some really neat stuff as a digital agency in the UK, trying to go off and say how do we work to be a digital agency that is sustainable and that is really trying to reduce our environmental footprint and the environmental footprint of our clients. From a practical point of view, probably the most useful thing to do would be to start prioritizing the Google Lighthouse scores. So most of the developers in the US are familiar with the Google Lighthouse, and there's a lot of tools that are being built in for scanning for page size or performance. Sort of looking for there's accessibility issues in there. There's SEO issues that are built into Google Lighthouse. But if you're able to focus in on the performance score and encourage people to think about what can we do to start paying more attention to this. Can we get 100% accessibility and 100% performance when we're trying to evaluate that? And that may include thinking about things like the broader user journey. So if we can give our users a better user experience, then maybe that'll be something that will actually reduce the CO2 load of the website. So if we can more easily help them find the information that they want without having to click on a bunch of our pages, that may be a really useful way to go off and to reduce the CO2. The PWAs are a really great way to try and support users, especially mobile users, on reducing their or speeding up their performance time and making sure that they're able to go off and to use their devices more effectively.
It occurs to me this might be one of those rare situations where like the business concern, the user experience concern, and the technical concern might all kind of agree on a thing without much, right? Because if a page loads faster, it sounds like that, well, in theory would load your costs, since that's like less load on whatever hosting service you're using, which means less environmental impact because you're using less power. But then also, people like it when pages load faster. Yeah. So potentially also a better user experience. And I hear you also talking about reducing interactions. Potentially that can also lead to those sorts of improvements. Am I hearing that correctly? Or maybe this is like that rare nexus of agreement?
Absolutely. It definitely is an area where there is a win-win-win if you're looking for it and you're able to go off and to align it. So, it's interesting looking at at what's happening in the federal government space in the U.S. around the CX customer experience executive order that went out last year. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that to sort of say, well, how do we actually improve the performance of our websites, because nobody likes a slow website. That's not something that I like in downtown with a high-speed internet connection, and I really don't like it when I'm out at my cottage trying to go off and browse the internet from my phone. So again, how do we try and find those situations so that we can give everyone a good experience, no matter what level of bandwidth or technology they happen to have?
Yeah, it does sound like, for example, if you are one of those folks that have like a lower power device, or maybe you're just in a place with slightly more difficult network connectivity as far as performance goes. Maybe it's higher latency, maybe there's less available bandwidth. It sounds like that itself can become a bit of an accessibility barrier. For sure. Has this been a problem that you've experienced in your work? And How have you sought to address that?
I mean, I do try and look for allies in my work. How do we try and find ways that we can support multiple projects and multiple targets? Because I think that there are often times where what gets the most traction is the shiny, flashy things. So that's the sharp design, the interesting interactions, the fascinating movies, and it's like, okay, well those are all neat, but ultimately what I want to do is accomplish a task. And as a user, I come to a website to accomplish the task, and if I can have a better experience and make sure that whether I have a disability or not, whether I'm connecting remotely or not, that I can try and concentrate that into a I think that there's ways if we're able to work together, we can actually accomplish a lot more.
It sounds a bit like you're describing. Well, there's a vocab term for this that is not in my brain at the moment, but effectively this idea of like you kind of progressively make something more complex depending on like the capabilities you detect that a device has.
Progressive enhancement.
There it is.
Yeah. So yeah, progressive enhancement is a great approach, right? Where you're adding JavaScript to add more dynamic elements. If you know that somebody is interested in having animation, you add that animation, but you're making it optional so that you're not forcing that animations on people, because animations both take more bandwidth, but they also can make people actually physically ill. So there's something called visually induced motion sickness that can basically you can ruin somebody's day by giving them a parallax website when they're not expecting it. So that's something that often web developers aren't thinking about because they're not aware of the implications that their design can have on other people. We've learned a lot about things like epilepsy and how flashing lights have impacts on people with epilepsy, but that's just one type of visual stimulus that can have an impact on people's cognitive states of mind. So we are really quite complicated as a species, and there's so much diversity out there and so much to learn that really this is a great opportunity to try and say, well, how do we communicate effectively to more people using these amazing digital tools that we have right now? And so much of it just requires thinking about it and being intentional about how we're building this, so that we're not trying to build a perfect interface, but we're just trying to build an interface that's better today than it was yesterday. That it's about progress versus perfection. So how do we structure that into our processes so that whether you're thinking about accessibility or sustainability, that we're looking at seeing this as a journey that we're going to be continually adding to, and this is, I think that so much of the I think so much of our society is really already there. So for example, you don't expect that the operating system that comes with your phone will be the one that you have when it throughout its entire lifetime. You might upgrade your phone 20, 30, 40, 50 times in the span of the ownership of that phone, just because there are security updates that need to get sent out on a regular basis. There's additional features that come out. That's just how the web works, and the internet in general. So we should be able to go off and to think about that for everything that we're doing, that we're not actually releasing a final product, but we're just building the best release for now. And in the future, we will go off and try and make it more sustainable and more accessible so that we can have a better impact about the services we're trying to deliver.
As folks are working on these incremental changes, where they're talking about things like performance, accessibility, sustainability, security, these are all things that require energy and advocacy on a project or a product to balance against. There's also then like kind of that functional feature stuff that becomes part of the product as well. What have you seen work as far as folks trying to figure out like the best balance for the right amount of time and energy for each one of these kind of complicated topics?
I mean, balance is a tricky one, and I think that it is, especially when you're looking at challenges where you can't have a site, you can't not have security. That's something that's got to be built into the website. But likewise, I think you can't not have accessibility. Just sort of thinking about even the long-term the long-term implications of the projects you're developing. So if you build in a project that doesn't have accessibility baked in, it's not going to be as accessible for your SEO, or for that matter, when you're trying to go off and upgrade your system so that it can engage with Siri or Alexa or Google Home. Like all of those tools, all those machine tools need to have semantics built in. So if we can think about this as supporting both our future selves, but also the future applications that we're trying to go off and support. So accessibility is really something that we're investing in for the long term, and I think it comes down to trying to help invest the team to learn, so that everyone sort of understands what the next load is, but also trying to say how do we use open source tools to try and work with a community in order to see that we're not trying to do this all on our own. That if we're trying to think about accessibility just as within our own individual silos, it is going to be rather overwhelming. But if we're able to say, okay, well, we've got something like the USWDS, the US Web Design System, that's actually a fairly large community that has already thought quite a lot about accessibility, that's thinking about performance. They haven't thought really about sustainability yet, but that's something that's coming, and that there's ways to look at incorporation of things like SVG graphics, so that there's a better support for things like dark mode, which are good for accessibility, but also really quite good for the environment, because if you're able to use a dark screen, it will actually consume less power than a light background does, at least on most monitors. So yeah, trying to think about ways that we can work collaboratively on these things, so that we're not simply focused on what are our needs within our particular silos. That we can learn from others, we can share with others, and we can find a way to produce a digital experience that's really one that's the best for everyone.
If there's someone out there that, say they're working on an existing project, and this is something they're listening to us and finding like, oh man, it's time for this, or maybe they've had this on their mind already. What advice would you give them as they're trying to maybe raise it up as something of a higher priority in a project where maybe it hasn't always been there?
I think that it is useful to be part of a community. So there's a great Slack community and web community called climateaction.tech. And that is a community that has a lot of resources available. I think it's useful to ask questions in places like that. There's also an online conference called Sustainable UX that's looking at sustainable design and efforts to try and to reduce our environmental footprint through design. So learning is always the first step, but also looking at what can you do? Like if you can use a tool like the website carbon.com website to evaluate the work that you're doing, well, then you might sort of see like how are we doing comparatively? Are we better than average, or are we worse than average? And what kind of goals do we want to have? If we want to sort of think about from a performance perspective, what is our ideal page weight that we're targeting? Do we want to have a page weight that is, the average page weight of a website right now is about 4 megabytes, which is larger than the average. Was larger than the initial download of the video game Doom. So if you've got something that is an interactive game that many of us enjoyed at one point in our lives, and you've got the average web page being larger than that whole video game, we're doing something wrong. And I think that's so much of that is like thinking about, well, what libraries are we using? What third-party applications are we using? What are the things we can get rid of? What are the places that we can think about reducing the page weight or the resources we're consuming, so that we can have a faster, better experience for all of our users and the planet itself, for that matter.
And of course, something I heard in that answer that really just got latched on in my brain is that example of the size of Doom. I feel like that could now be a standard of measure. Like how many Dooms is this web page? I now I want to see a slide deck at work where someone's has a chart of how many dooms each page is. That would be that would brighten my day, I think.
That's right. It'd be quite entertaining to go off and have that visual reference. But it is really interesting to have a goal to say how much do we want to transfer? What is the are there ways that we can collectively to go off and say what are our expectations? What is a reasonable thing we should be expecting? And also sort of what are the extremes? I think that the folks at Whole Grain Digital did a low carbon website with for Mercedes or something like that. Where they're producing an electric vehicle, I think, and they wanted to go off and have a nice low impact site that they were developing, but what was also visually interesting, and it's a fascinating constraint for designers to go off and say, okay, you have to build this website under 300 kilobytes. Go. What can you do with CSS, SVGs, with text? How do you make this visually interesting? If you have that constraint in that you can't simply upload your 10 megabit background image or your interactive videos that load on page load. It makes it much more challenging to go off and for designers to go off and create beautiful websites, but it certainly is possible, and that a good designer can make that happen. I am not a good designer, but that's
that is not my skill set either, but I get the privilege to work with some really, really great ones, and you definitely want to have access to that talent for this, it sounds like, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
During our prep conversation, we talked a bit about how all this might mean putting some fresh thinking into what it means to build, a quality product, in quotes there. Have you developed any hot takes about what that means since we chatted that time?
I think that it is interesting going back to there's a thinker who started in the 50s talking about sort of in Japan's industrialization, Edward Demings, who had all of these ideas about how to go off and create quality manufacturing and how organizations needed to embrace work and workers differently, and so that there's a real sense of embedding that culture of quality into the work that a whole team is doing in order to deliver a really high standard quality product. And that thinking really helped our modern industrial development in terms of standardized screws and nuts, and making sure that cars were able to go off and to confidently know that you could assemble them where each piece was essentially exactly identical up to a certain percentage of error. And I think that there's a lot of those ideas about how to work effectively as a team, how to engage collaboratively in terms of communicating errors or processes that may affect the overall work on a shop floor, or for that matter within the workflow of a design team. When we're thinking about our product life cycles, I think there's a lot that digital has to learn from these older ideas of building quality into workmanship, and being able to reproduce that time and time again. So I think going back to Edward Demings is a really useful beginning, but also looking at things like what is happening in the UK with how the UK government is implementing service standards. What is being done around in the US around accessibility.digital.gov and looking at accessibility in teams. And so again, reinforcing those ideas that accessibility isn't just something that sits on one person's shoulders, but something that a whole team needs to go off and to bear responsibility for. So those are at least some ideas around how to think about quality in a way that is different than we have in the last 20 years, and things that we need to build that into how we're thinking about accessibility now. But also we need to start quickly incorporating that into sustainability as well, because we just don't have the time to go off and to have another 2 decades of bringing these learnings from implementing quality systems from accessibility. We don't have that 20 years to go off and build that into sustainability. We need to really find ways to prioritize and reduce the impact of our websites, sooner, because we just don't have the time.
Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on Civic Tech Chat. I have no doubt folks are going to listen to this conversation and take some interesting nuggets into their day.
Thank you very much, Ryan. This is wonderful.
You can follow us on Twitter using the handle @CivicTechChat, visit us on the web at civictech.chat, or subscribe to us for content updates wherever it is you download your podcasts.